Hollywood, the land where dreams take flight beneath flashing cameras, where red carpets seem endless, and where the applause of millions can crown someone a legend overnight. But behind the velvet curtains and dazzling lights lies a far darker reality. The brighter the spotlight, the deeper the shadows it casts. For decades, the icons of film and music have paid a devastating price for their fame. It wasn't just grueling contracts or the pressures of global stardom, it was addiction. A silent predator, creeping into dressing rooms, hotel suites, and private mansions, slowly consuming even the strongest of stars. Marilyn Monroe, who gave the world her radiant smile yet could not find peace in her own nights. Heath Ledger, who became the Joker so completely that the role swallowed him whole. Elvis Presley, the king himself, who died not on a stage but alone, surrounded by bottles of pills meant to keep him upright. This isn't just a countdown of fallen celebrities, it's an autopsy of Hollywood's darkest truth, that behind the shimmering image, there were cries for help no one wanted to hear. Tonight, we uncover 20 of the most haunting drug addictions in Hollywood history, a brutal reminder that in Tinseltown, the line between glory and ruin can be just one pill away. Elvis Presley wasn't just a singer. He was a revolution. The curled lip, the swinging hips, the voice that electrified a generation. He didn't just perform music. He reshaped culture itself. To millions, he was untouchable. But inside Graceland, the king was becoming a prisoner of his own legend. By the mid-70s, Elvis was no longer the vibrant performer who had once set stages on fire. Behind closed doors, his life revolved around a devastating dependence on pills. His medicine cabinet wasn't a cabinet at all, it was an entire pharmacy. Barbiturates, Quaaludes, Demerol, Valium, codeine, dozens of prescriptions, each taken in shocking quantities, each meant to numb the pain, to help him sleep, to keep him standing when his body was collapsing. On August 16, 1977, the world stopped. Elvis was just 42 years old when he was found slumped over in the bathroom of Graceland. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrhythmia, but the truth ran deeper. His body had been slowly breaking down from years of chemical abuse, diabetes, glaucoma, even life-threatening constipation brought on by the drugs that were supposed to keep him alive. Doctors, managers, even family members looked the other way, desperate to protect the myth of the king, even as the man himself crumbled before their eyes. He couldn't perform without being medicated into numbness, and yet those very pills were killing him. When Elvis collapsed in that bathroom, it wasn't a sudden tragedy, it was the final act of a long, quiet downfall. We remember the sequin jumpsuits, the screaming fans, the blazing charisma, but behind the legend was a man begging for help, suffocated by fame, destroyed by silence. Elvis Presley didn't just die of heart failure, he died from being Elvis Presley. To the world, Cory Monteith was the golden boy of Glee, the charming quarterback with the goofy grin and the heart of gold. He embodied innocence, warmth, and possibility. Fans saw Finn Hudson, the dreamer who could always find the right song to heal a broken moment. But behind the spotlight, Cory was carrying a secret far heavier than any script could ever reveal. His battle with addiction began long before Hollywood ever knew his name. By the age of 13, Cory was already drinking heavily. By 16, he had turned to hard drugs. By 19, he had dropped out of school. And his first trip to rehab marked the beginning of a lifelong fight. Fame didn't erase those scars, it simply covered them with a glossy sheen. When Glee launched him to worldwide stardom, the public saw only the success story, not the struggle that lurked beneath. Cory tried to fight back. He spoke openly about his past, sought treatment, and checked into rehab again in 2013. Supported by his girlfriend and co-star Lea Michele, it seemed like he had reached a turning point. For a moment, there was hope. But addiction is a cruel and relentless enemy. Just weeks after leaving treatment, Cory returned to Vancouver, a city tied to his darkest memories. On July 13, 2013, he was found lifeless in his hotel room. The autopsy revealed a toxic mix of heroin and alcohol. He was only 31. The news hit like a thunderclap. Fans were devastated. The Glee cast shattered, and Lea left heartbroken. Experts later explained that after sobriety, tolerance drops drastically, What once felt manageable becomes fatal. But Cory's death was more than a medical tragedy. It was a mirror held up to the lies we tell ourselves about addiction. Cory didn't look like an addict. He was handsome, successful, kind, and beloved. But that's the danger. Addiction has no single face. It hides behind red carpet smiles, scripted laughter, and polished images. Cory Monteith didn't die because he was reckless. He died because he was hurting. And because the world never teaches you how to outrun the shadows of your past, even when the spotlight is shining directly on you. John Belushi wasn't just funny, he was a force of nature. From Saturday Night Live to the Blues Brothers, he exploded onto every stage and screen with raw, unstoppable energy. Audiences didn't just laugh at Belushi, they gasped for breath, overwhelmed by the chaos, the sweat, the sheer electricity of his presence. He was wild, untamed, unforgettable. But behind that manic brilliance was a man spiraling out of control. At the height of his fame, cocaine was everywhere, flowing like champagne at Hollywood's wildest parties. According to Vanity Fair, during the filming of The Blues Brothers, cocaine was so common it was actually included in the production budget. Belushi lived in excess, and the excess consumed him. Crew members sometimes had to physically hold him up between takes, keeping him upright long enough to finish a scene. Off camera, the parties blurred into endless nights of reckless abandon. In his final months, Belushi was disappearing into the shadows. New York clubs, all-night binges, locked VIP rooms where the laughter ended and the silence grew heavier. 5 days before his death, he sat for his last photo shoot. The photographer remembered a man who looked distant, tired, already fading away. Then came March 5, 1982. At the Chateau Marmont in West Hollywood, once a glamorous refuge for the stars, Belushi was found lifeless in Bungalow 3. The cause? A speedball. A lethal mix of heroin and cocaine. He was just 33. The shock was immediate. Friends were shattered. Fans devastated. The comedy world silenced. Belushi's death wasn't just another Hollywood overdose. It was a wake-up call. A brutal reminder that genius and addiction often walk hand in hand, and that the brightest lights can burn out the fastest. John Belushi lived like a supernova, brilliant, fierce, and blindingly fast. And like a supernova, he left the world too soon, leaving behind only the echo of his laughter and the tragedy of a life devoured by excess. Chris Farley was chaos wrapped in laughter. On Saturday Night Live and in films like Tommy Boy, he threw himself into every role, with reckless abandon, crashing through tables, shouting until his voice cracked, and making audiences howl with joy. He was a human wrecking ball of comedy, a man who could make you laugh simply by entering the room. But what looked like wild hilarity on the outside was, all too often, a desperate cry for help on the inside. Farley's private life was a battlefield. Cocaine, heroin, alcohol, painkillers, he chased them all, in an endless attempt to quiet the demons clawing at him. Those close to him knew he was slipping. Lorne Michaels, David Spade, Tom Arnold, they all tried to intervene, watching their friends spiral out of control. Studios even forced him into sobriety contracts, monitoring his behavior while filming. Yet as soon as the camera stopped rolling, so did his fragile control. For a fleeting moment, there seemed to be hope. He wrapped filming on Almost Heroes, had been cast as the original voice of Shrek, and spoke excitedly about Christmas plans. His friends recalled glimpses of light smiles, Mass on Sundays, the faint possibility of recovery. But addiction is merciless. On December 14, 1997, Farley plunged into a 4-day binge of drugs and alcohol. On the final night, he hired a sex worker who later admitted she stole from him before leaving him collapsed on the floor. His last words were heartbreaking, "Don't leave me." 4 days later, his brother John found him dead in their Chicago apartment. Chris Farley was just 33, the same age as his idol, John Belushi, when he too died of an overdose. The toxicology report revealed cocaine, morphine, and marijuana in his system. His heart, battered by years of abuse, had simply given out. Chris Farley didn't die because he wanted to. He died because addiction lied to him. It promised relief, told him he wasn't alone, whispered that the pain would pass, but it never did. And so, the world lost a man who gave us endless laughter while drowning in silence. She sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow, And for the world, Judy Garland became the eternal symbol of magic, innocence, and hope. To millions, she was America's sweetheart, a radiant child star with a voice that could melt even the hardest heart. But behind those wide, sparkling eyes was not a fairy tale life, it was a carefully disguised nightmare. By the time she was only 13, Judy had already been transformed into a workhorse for MGM Studios. She wasn't just managed, she was controlled. Executives dictated her food, her sleep, her weight, her very identity. Pep pills to stay awake, sleeping pills to rest, dieting pills to stay thin. She wasn't being raised, she was being used, molded into a product to be sold to the world. During the filming of The Wizard of Oz, Judy was just 16. Her diet consisted of black coffee, chicken soup, and amphetamines, while barbiturates were handed out to force her into rest when the exhaustion became unbearable. She was a teenager, but Hollywood never let her be a child. Those pills became her constant companions, and soon, her captors. As she grew older, the weight of that manipulation only deepened. Judy struggled through broken marriages, crushing financial instability, and constant mental health battles. Studios turned on her when she faltered, labeling her unreliable, when the addictions and breakdowns finally spilled into public view. But through every collapse, she kept singing, her voice trembling with both brilliance and pain. By the late 1960s, she was worn down, singing in small clubs, drained of energy, underpaid, and overmedicated. Then, on June 22, 1969, just 12 days after her 47th birthday, Judy Garland was found lifeless in a London bathroom. The official cause, a barbiturate overdose, ruled an accident, but in truth, it was the slow, relentless destruction of a woman exploited since childhood. Judy Garland's story isn't just tragic, it's infuriating. She wasn't given a chance to live freely, to grow on her own terms. Hollywood threw her into the spotlight, used her until she broke, and left her to battle her demons alone. She gave the world her voice, her magic, her soul, and in return, she was handed pills and silence. She never made it home. River Phoenix was unlike anyone Hollywood had ever seen. With the face of an angel and the restless soul of a poet, he carried himself like a rebel in a town obsessed with conformity. He was an activist, a vegan before it was fashionable, and an artist who cared more about truth than fame. To audiences, he wasn't just an actor, he was raw honesty incarnate. Every role, from Stand By Me to My Own Private Idaho, carried a depth that made you believe he wasn't acting at all. He was living it. But the brightest flames often burn out first. River had always shunned Hollywood's excesses. He wasn't known for wild parties or scandal. He seemed almost immune to the toxicity of Tinseltown. That's why his death was so shocking it didn't fit the narrative. On Halloween night, October 31st, 1993, River collapsed outside the Viper Room, a club co-owned by Johnny Depp. Just minutes earlier, he had been trembling, disoriented, his younger brother Joaquin and girlfriend Samantha Mathis by his side. On the sidewalk, in front of those who loved him most, River convulsed. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but it was too late. He was only 23 years old. The toxicology report revealed a fatal speedball, a mix of heroin and cocaine. For a young man who had built his life on clean living, activism, and artistic integrity, the truth was devastating. In the days leading up to his death, he had fallen into a binge with friends, including members of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, spiraling through sleepless nights and toxic highs. River's death hit Hollywood like a thunderclap. He wasn't just another actor lost to addiction. He was the actor of his generation, the one critics compared to James Dean, the one many believed could surpass even Brando or DiCaprio. He turned down blockbusters in favor of indie films. He sought meaning over money. He carried the weight of being different, of wanting authenticity in a world built on illusions. And yet, one night of weakness, one slip into the darkness, stole him away forever. River Phoenix didn't simply overdose. He was crushed by vulnerability, by the impossible expectations of being a prodigy, by the merciless pace of a system that devours the young. He didn't fade. He blazed, brilliant and brief, leaving behind a light that still haunts the world 3 decades later. Heath Ledger wasn't just talented, he was transformative. From 10 Things I Hate About You to Brokeback Mountain, he carried a raw authenticity that made audiences forget they were watching a performance. But nothing could have prepared the world for his turn as the Joker in The Dark Knight. Twisted, unhinged, brilliant Heath didn't just play the role, he became it. And in the process, the line between art and life blurred fatally. Even before Gotham's clown prince took hold of him, Heath was already struggling. The sudden fame, the relentless press, the weight of expectation, all of it fed into his worsening anxiety and chronic insomnia. Friends said he was lucky to get 2 hours of sleep a night. To cope, he turned to pills, painkillers, sleeping tablets, anti-anxiety medications. What began as a search for rest quickly became a dangerous cocktail of silence for a mind that would not quiet down. When his relationship with actress Michelle Williams ended in 2007, Heath's world seemed to fracture. The two shared a daughter, Matilda, and though he adored her, friends recalled how the breakup left him hollowed, distracted, and increasingly lost in his work. He poured himself into the Joker, a role so consuming that it seemed to gnaw at his sanity. In interviews, he admitted the character kept him up at night, his thoughts tangled in chaos. On January 22, 2008, Heath Ledger was found unconscious in his New York apartment by his housekeeper and a massage therapist. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but it was too late. He was gone at just 28 years old. The toxicology report listed 6 different prescription drugs in his system, including oxycodone, hydrocodone, diazepam, and temazepam. Officially, his death was ruled an accidental overdose. But was it really an accident? Or the inevitable collapse of a man crushed under the weight of his own genius? His posthumous Oscar win for The Dark Knight was bittersweet. It honored a performance that redefined cinema, but it also felt like a funeral, an acknowledgement that the price of brilliance had been far too high. Heath didn't die chasing a high. He died searching for peace, for rest, for silence in a world that demanded too much of him. We remember the Joker's chaotic laughter, the smeared makeup, the unforgettable madness. But the true tragedy is that when the camera stopped rolling, no one was there to tell Heath Ledger that he could stop performing. He gave everything until there was nothing left. Marilyn Monroe was more than a movie star. She was an icon, a myth, the very embodiment of American glamour. The platinum hair, the red lips, the sultry smile, she could stop time with a glance. Yet behind the breathy voice and dazzling beauty was a woman who carried unbearable loneliness. Born Norma Jean, abandoned by her father and raised in foster homes, Marilyn spent her life searching for love, safety, and belonging. Hollywood gave her fame, but it never gave her peace. By the early 1960s, Marilyn's image was unstoppable. She was the ultimate sex symbol, the fantasy of millions. But her private life was collapsing. Her marriages had failed. Her mental health was deteriorating. And the studios that once adored her were now firing her for being unreliable. Few asked why she couldn't function. The truth was simple and devastating. She was surviving on a fragile chemical balancing act. Amphetamines to wake up, barbiturates to fall asleep, alcohol to silence the noise. Each day was a dangerous routine of self-medication. Insomnia haunted her nights, while the spotlight devoured her days. She was exhausted from pretending, exhausted from performing, exhausted from being Marilyn Monroe. On August 5, 1962, she was found lifeless in her Los Angeles home. She was just 36. Officially, the cause was listed as an overdose of barbiturates. But speculation has never stopped. Was it accidental, political, or something more sinister? What we do know is this: Marilyn Monroe didn't die because she was weak. She died because she was tired of living in a world that adored her image but ignored her pain. Her words still echo today. Fame doesn't fulfill you. It warms you a bit, but that warmth is temporary. And when it fades, you're left in the cold. Marilyn lived in that cold, wrapped in silence and isolation, until it finally consumed her. Marilyn Monroe didn't die from glamour. She died from being trapped in the role of Marilyn Monroe. The woman behind the myth was never truly seen, never truly loved, not by Hollywood, not by the world. And so the goddess, worshipped by millions, died alone. Philip Seymour Hoffman was one of the greatest actors of his generation. With a chameleon-like ability to vanish into roles, He didn't just play characters, he inhabited them. From Capote to The Master, he gave audiences performances so raw and layered they often forgot they were watching a man act. He could make you laugh, ache, and weep all in the same scene. But behind the accolades, behind the standing ovations, was a private war he was losing. Hoffman's struggles with addiction began in his 20s, a time when success was just starting to find him. He fought hard, entered recovery, and stayed sober for over 2 decades. For a while, it seemed like he had won. But addiction has a way of waiting. In 2012, after years of sobriety, Hoffman relapsed. What began with alcohol spiraled quickly into heroin. Friends noticed the changes. He seemed tired, distracted, withdrawn. He admitted openly in interviews that he was slipping, but even those confessions carried a quiet shame. By 2014, the situation had become unmanageable. On February 2nd, Hoffman was found dead in his New York apartment. A syringe was still in his arm. Around him were dozens of bags of heroin, needles, prescription bottles, even a burned spoon, a chilling tableau of a genius, brought down by a monster he could not silence. The toxicology report revealed a lethal mix of heroin, cocaine, amphetamines, and benzodiazepines. He was just 46. To the public, the news was unthinkable. Not Hoffman. Not the man who had seemed so thoughtful, so intelligent, so in control. But addiction doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care how talented you are, how loved you are, or how many awards you've won. It only wants more. What killed Philip Seymour Hoffman wasn't just the drugs. It was the silence that surrounds relapse. In a culture that treats relapse as failure rather than part of recovery, Hoffman carried his struggle alone. He had medication in his apartment meant to help him fight the cravings. He wanted to stop, but shame and secrecy kept him trapped. Hoffman gave everything to his craft, but in the end, he couldn't play the one role that might have saved him himself. His death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a stark reminder that addiction thrives in silence, and that even the most brilliant among us can be broken by it. Anna Nicole Smith was larger than life. Blonde, bold, and built like a fantasy, she turned heads wherever she went. From Playboy playmate to reality TV sensation, she lived loud, laughed louder, and became a constant tabloid headline. But beneath the glamour and the chaos, Anna was a woman unraveling a soul desperate for love, peace, and stability, yet crushed under the relentless weight of fame. Her rise to notoriety was as explosive as her persona. In the 90s, she became infamous for her scandalous marriage to oil tycoon J. Howard Marshall, who was 89 at the time. Their union, and the bitter legal battles that followed his death, turned her into a late-night punchline, ridiculed by millions. Yet behind those cruel headlines was a woman already locked in a dangerous love affair with prescription drugs. It began innocently enough in her 20s. After cosmetic surgery, painkillers like Vicodin and Lortabs were prescribed, but soon they became a dependency. Muscle relaxants, Valium, Xanax, the list grew longer. By the early 2000s, Anna was riding a chemical roller coaster just to get through the day. Her reality show, meant to showcase her larger-than-life personality, instead revealed cracks, slurred speech, erratic behavior, and frequent blackouts. But nothing shattered her more than the tragedy of 2006. Just days after giving birth to her daughter, Anna's 20-year-old son, Daniel, died suddenly from a drug overdose. Those close to her said she was never the same. Her grief was unbearable, and instead of finding support, she drowned in pills, trying to numb the pain that refused to fade. Less than 5 months later, on February 8, 2007, Anna Nicole Smith was found unresponsive in a Florida hotel room. Despite desperate attempts to revive her, she was pronounced dead that afternoon. The cause? An accidental overdose from a deadly cocktail of sleeping pills, anti-anxiety medications, and painkillers. She was only 39. Anna Nicole Smith's story is often reduced to caricature, a gold digger, a reality TV oddity, a walking scandal. But strip away the tabloids and what remains is the portrait of a woman broken by grief, exploited by fame, and abandoned when she needed help the most. She wanted love. She wanted peace. But all Hollywood gave her was noise. And in the end, she died as she lived, under the harsh glare of judgment, still searching for silence. Brad Renfro was supposed to be the next big thing. At just 11 years old, he landed a breakout role in The Client, holding his own against Hollywood heavyweights like Tommy Lee Jones and Susan Sarandon. He wasn't polished, he wasn't trained, but he was real. His raw energy leapt off the screen, making audiences believe they were watching something rare, a star in the making. But Hollywood has a cruel way of celebrating young talent without protecting it. Fame hit Brad like a tidal wave, and by his teenage years, he was already drifting into dangerous waters. By 15, he was drinking heavily and experimenting with drugs. By 18, he was arrested. Each headline marked another stumble down a path he couldn't seem to escape. Heroin crept into his life like a whisper, slowly tightening its grip. Rehab stints, probation, petty arrests, it all became part of his story. Hollywood, which once embraced him as a prodigy, now turned its back. Yet Brad never gave up entirely. Friends said he still believed in a comeback, still auditioned, still dreamed of one more chance to prove himself. That chance never came. On January 15, 2008, Brad Renfro was found dead in his Los Angeles apartment. He was just 25 years old. The cause? A fatal overdose of heroin and morphine. 4 years younger than the character he once played in The Client. There was no massive media storm, no sweeping public tributes. His passing was quiet, almost forgotten. Another casualty in an industry littered with them. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest cut of all. Brad Renfro's story wasn't glamorous or sensational, it was painfully ordinary. The story of a boy given too much too soon, abandoned when the camera stopped rolling, and left to battle demons he couldn't defeat. Hollywood promised him the world. In the end, it gave him loneliness, addiction, and silence. Brad Renfro didn't just die young, he died forgotten. Don Simpson wasn't a movie star, but he was every bit as legendary. As a Hollywood producer, he reshaped the industry with hits like Top Gun, Beverly Hills Cop, and The Rock. He was a kingmaker, a man who could turn an idea into a box office empire. But for all his success, Simpson's life was ruled by one obsession: excess. More success, more sex, more drugs, more everything. He lived like the characters in his movies, fast, flashy, and reckless. Simpson wasn't the type to hide his vices. He flaunted them. His mansion was infamous for its wild parties, 5-star orgies, endless streams of cocaine, and a closet where prescription pills were alphabetized like a pharmacy. He kept doctors on speed dial, ensuring that his supply was never interrupted. To those around him, this wasn't just a lifestyle, it was self-destruction in plain sight. And yet, Hollywood tolerated it. Why? Because Simpson was a genius, and as long as he delivered billion-dollar franchises, no one dared to stop him. But no empire lasts forever. Years of unchecked indulgence finally caught up with him. On January 19, 1996, Don Simpson was found dead on the bathroom floor of his Bel Air mansion. He was 52. The autopsy revealed 21 different drugs in his system, a cocktail of stimulants, sedatives, and antidepressants. His official cause of death, heart failure, brought on by years of abuse. Don Simpson didn't overdose in secret. He died the way he lived: loud, excessive, and in full view of an industry that enabled him. To Hollywood, he was a genius until the day he became a liability. Then he was gone, buried under the very excess that once made him unstoppable. Simpson's legacy is both dazzling and damning. He gave the world blockbusters that defined an era, but his own life became a cautionary tale. He built an empire and then let it collapse on top of him. Michael K. Williams was more than an actor, he was a presence. With that scar etched across his face and those piercing eyes, he carried a raw intensity that made every character unforgettable. From Omar Little in The Wire to Chalky White in Boardwalk Empire, Williams didn't just play roles, he channeled truth. His performances bled authenticity, born not from imagination but from lived pain. Yet even at the height of his career, Michael carried the scars of his past. Growing up in Brooklyn, he struggled with poverty, violence, and identity. Addiction followed him like a shadow. He spoke openly about it, admitting that even as fame came, the streets never let him go completely. His vulnerability was what made him magnetic on screen, but it was also what made him fragile in real life. On September 6, 2021. The world lost him. Williams was found dead in his Brooklyn apartment, gone not in a blaze of scandal but in the quiet devastation of a fatal overdose. The medical examiner confirmed a toxic mix: heroin, cocaine, fentanyl, and parafluorofentanyl. He was 54 years old. The aftermath was heartbreaking. 4 men were later charged with supplying the drugs that killed him, but no courtroom could erase the grief. Fans mourned, colleagues wept. Communities felt the hole left behind by a man who had turned pain into poetry. Michael K. Williams didn't just act. He bore his soul on screen, carrying the weight of every ghost he had ever known. His death wasn't about recklessness, it was about survival, about the unbearable burden of trying to keep going while fighting demons that never truly disappear. He didn't fade. He burned fierce, soulful, and brutally honest. And though the man is gone, his performances remain, shards of truth piercing through the illusion of Hollywood, reminding us of a life that was both extraordinary and achingly human. Whitney Houston was called the voice for a reason. From the moment she sang her first notes, the world knew it was hearing something divine. Songs like "I Will Always Love You" and "Greatest Love of All" didn't just top charts, they became anthems of a generation. She sold over 200 million records, broke barriers, and redefined what it meant to be a superstar. To millions, she was untouchable. But behind the flawless vocals and radiant smile was a woman consumed by heartbreak, pressure, and addiction. Fame arrived swiftly and ferociously. Whitney was groomed to be perfect voice, perfect beauty, perfect life. But perfection is impossible to sustain. The pressure weighed on her, and in the shadows, drugs became both escape and prison. Her tumultuous marriage to Bobby Brown only amplified the chaos. The headlines filled with stories of violent fights, erratic behavior, and missed performances. The woman who once seemed angelic was crumbling before the eyes of the world. Crack cocaine and alcohol became her constant companions. Interviews revealed a broken spirit. Her once golden voice grew hoarse, fragile, diminished by years of abuse. Still, fans hoped for a comeback. And for a moment, it looked like one might happen. In 2009, she released "I Look to You," a triumphant reminder of her power. But the victory was short-lived. On February 11, 2012, Whitney Houston was found unconscious in the bathtub of her Beverly Hilton hotel room, hours before she was set to attend a pre-Grammy party. She was only 48. The official cause of death: accidental drowning, with cocaine use and heart disease as contributing factors. The tragedies sent shockwaves through the world. A voice that had once soared effortlessly through octaves was silenced forever. But Whitney's story wasn't just about drugs, it was about the crushing weight of expectation, the loneliness of fame, and the relentless battle to stay afloat when the world demands your perfection but never forgives your humanity. Whitney Houston gave everything: her voice, her spirit, her soul to the world. And in the end, she had nothing left for herself. Prince was a phenomenon, a master of reinvention, a musical genius who blurred the lines between rock, funk, pop, and soul. With hits like "Purple Rain," "When Doves Cry," and "Kiss," he didn't just create songs, he created worlds. His stage presence was electric, his artistry unmatched, his individuality untouchable. He wasn't just a star, he was an era. But even legends are not immune to pain. Behind the dazzling costumes, the boundary-shattering music, and the mystique he so carefully crafted, Prince was battling a relentless physical struggle. Years of performing in high heels, jumping, spinning, and throwing himself into concerts took a brutal toll on his body. The injuries piled up, and with them came prescriptions, painkillers that slowly became a quiet lifeline. Prince was notoriously private. He didn't flaunt excess the way so many others did. He kept his battles hidden, concealed behind closed doors at Paisley Park. But in the final years of his life, whispers grew louder. Friends noticed his frailty. Fans noticed canceled shows and strange behavior. On April 21, 2016, the world was shaken when Prince was found unresponsive in an elevator at his Minnesota estate. He was 57. The cause: an accidental overdose of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid far more powerful than morphine. The man who once seemed untouchable, immortal even, had been undone by the very medicine meant to keep him performing. His death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. Fentanyl was beginning to sweep across America, claiming lives in silence. If it could take Prince, it could take anyone. Investigators later discovered counterfeit pills laced with the deadly drug, evidence of a system that preys on vulnerability, even of the rich and powerful. Prince gave the world his genius, his eccentricity, his fearless artistry. He pushed boundaries until the very end, but in private, he was another soul seeking relief from pain. His loss was monumental, a reminder that even icons bleed, even gods of music can fall. Amy Winehouse was a comet, brilliant, fiery, and destined to burn out too soon. With her beehive hair, winged eyeliner, and smoky contralto voice, she redefined soul for a new generation. Her album Back to Black wasn't just music, it was confession. Songs like Rehab and Love is a Losing Game weren't playful hits. They were warnings, hauntingly prophetic glimpses into her unraveling. Fame came fast, and Amy met it with raw honesty. She never pretended to be polished. She was vulnerable, chaotic, messy, and that's why people loved her. But the very traits that made her real also left her exposed. Her struggle with alcohol and drugs became front-page news. Paparazzi stalked her every stumble, turning her pain into entertainment. Her personal life spiraled in tandem with her addiction. Her marriage to Blake Fielder Civil was a whirlwind of passion and destruction, riddled with drugs, fights, and arrests. Friends begged her to seek help, but Amy often resisted. They tried to make me go to rehab, and I said, no, no, no. It was a lyric that became her anthem and her epitaph. On July 23, 2011, Amy Winehouse was found dead in her London home. She was only 27, joining the infamous 27 Club of artists lost too young. The cause: alcohol poisoning. At the time of her death, her blood alcohol level was more than 5 times the legal driving limit. The tragedy was almost unbearable because it felt inevitable. Fans had watched her fall apart in real time, desperate for someone to save her, furious at a system that profited from her collapse. But no one could stop the momentum. Amy Winehouse didn't just sing songs, she sang her soul. And in those songs, she told us her fate long before it arrived. She was too honest for her own survival, too fragile for the weight of the world's gaze. Her voice still echoes, drenched in heartbreak, a reminder of a genius who turned her wounds into art and paid the ultimate price for it. Mac Miller was the voice of a generation trying to find its way. From his early days as a teenage rap prodigy in Pittsburgh to his later years as a deeply introspective artist, he evolved in front of the world's eyes. Albums like Swimming in Circles revealed a man who was maturing, shedding the party rap image for something rawer, more soulful, more vulnerable. To his fans, Mac wasn't just a rapper, he was a friend who put their struggles into words. But behind the music, Mac was drowning in his own shadows. He was open about his battles with substance abuse and depression, often weaving them into his lyrics with heartbreaking honesty. Fame, relationships, heartbreak, it all fueled the cycle. His breakup with Ariana Grande only intensified the scrutiny, with tabloids dissecting his every move, ignoring the depth of his pain. Friends said Mac was trying to get better. He spoke openly about wanting sobriety, about trying to take care of himself. But addiction doesn't play fair. It waits, it tempts, it disguises itself as comfort. And on September 7, 2018, the trap was sprung. That morning, Mac Miller was found unresponsive in his Los Angeles home. He was only 26 years old. The cause: an accidental overdose of fentanyl, cocaine, and alcohol. The combination was lethal. Another life stolen by the opioid crisis sweeping across America. Investigators later revealed he had been sold counterfeit pills, laced with fentanyl pills he thought were safe but were anything but. The news shattered fans and devastated the music world. Mac had been on the brink of a creative renaissance, his latest work hailed as his best yet. His death wasn't just a loss of talent, it was the silencing of a voice that spoke for the lost, the broken, the searching. Mac Miller's story is one of devastating contradiction. He gave comfort to millions through his music, yet he couldn't escape his own despair. He told us his struggles in plain sight, but the world didn't listen until it was too late. He didn't want to die. He wanted to live. But addiction, once again, had the final word. DMX was more than a rapper. He was a force of nature. With his gravel-rough voice, explosive delivery, and raw authenticity, he dominated hip-hop in the late 90s and early 2000s. Albums like It's Dark and Hell is Hot and Then There Was X weren't just music. They were sermons of survival, chronicles of pain, prayers disguised as rap anthems. To millions, he was the embodiment of struggle and strength, a man who turned his scars into soundtracks. But even warriors bleed. Behind the aggressive persona was Earl Simmons, a man tormented by trauma from childhood, abandoned, abused, and scarred long before fame ever found him. He turned to drugs at a painfully young age. A mentor he trusted slipped him a blunt laced with crack cocaine when he was only 14. That betrayal planted a seed that would grow into a lifelong battle. DMX's career soared, but his personal life spiraled. Arrests, lawsuits, rehab stints, relapses, his demons chased him in and out of the headlines. He was open about his pain, speaking in interviews about addiction as both his curse and his cage. Fans saw him pray on stage, drop to his knees mid-performance, begging God for strength, even as he fell again and again. On April 2, 2021, DMX suffered a heart attack triggered by a drug overdose. He was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was catastrophic. For days, fans kept vigil, blasting his music in the streets, praying for a miracle. On April 9th, he was pronounced dead at just 50 years old. The loss was seismic. Hip-hop didn't just lose a legend, it lost its preacher, its warrior, its prophet of pain. DMX gave everything he had to the world, even as addiction clawed at his soul. His legacy lives in the anthems that still shake speakers, in the prayers that still echo, in the honesty he poured into every lyric. DMX didn't lose because he was weak. He lost because addiction is relentless, merciless, and unforgiving. But in death, as in life, his voice remains unshakable, loud, raw, defiant, a reminder that even in his darkest battles, he never stopped fighting. 20 names, 20 lives, 20 tragedies that echo through Hollywood's gilded halls. From Elvis Presley, the king who crumbled under the weight of his throne, to Amy Winehouse, who sang her own downfall into the microphone, to DMX, the warrior who fought until his very last breath, each story is different. Yet all are bound by the same cruel thread: addiction. What these stories reveal is not weakness, but vulnerability. These were men and women who gave everything to the world: music, laughter, magic, unforgettable performances. And in return, the world demanded more. More shows, more tours, more brilliance, until the only thing left for them to give was themselves. Addiction is not glamorous. It is not a headline. It is not a scandal to be whispered about in gossip columns. It is a disease, one that thrives in silence and shame, one that strikes with merciless precision, regardless of fame, fortune, or talent. For every star we've named, there are countless others still struggling in the shadows, voices we may never hear, battles we may never see. And so, this list is not just a tribute to the fallen. It is a warning, a reminder that the spotlight, for all its beauty, can cast the darkest shadows. That behind the makeup, the costumes, the flashing cameras, there are human beings fragile, hurting, desperate for help. Elvis, Judy, Heath, Amy, Mac, Whitney. Their stories are etched into Hollywood's history, not only as cautionary tales, but as cries for compassion. Because if we cannot learn to see past the glamour, to hear the pain behind the performance, then the cycle will continue, and more stars will burn out far too soon. They gave us everything. The least we can do is remember them not just as legends, but as people.